Oh, hey, it's good to see you again. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of See It Again Cinema. Tonight's film is Go, which was chosen by my good movie-going friend, Mark. So, hey, Mark.
How's it going?
It's pretty good. This is one of those times where I have not seen the film, so I'm going into it blind, but this is a film you've seen before. Can you tell me a little bit about when you first saw it and what you thought of it back then?
Sure. So this movie came out in 1999. I would have been in sixth grade at that time. Though I can't remember when I first saw it, but I actually would have listened to the soundtrack first. For a lot of movies when I was for a time when I was in middle school, a lot of the ways that I was exposed to music was through my older sister. And she had this soundtrack on CD, and I stole it from her, and it was in pretty regular rotation. And so I actually remember the soundtrack first, before I remember seeing the movie. I remember liking the movie, but it's probably been 20 years since I've seen it.
I wish I had a cool older sister who could have introduced me to really great music. You know, the 90s, the golden era of CD movie soundtracks. Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about the soundtrack?
Sure. So the two main summer hits that it had on there was "Steal My Sunshine" by Len and "Bathwater" by No Doubt, which I'm sure really bring you back. But the thing that I remember is that this is the movie that introduced me to the band Air, and this was before they did the score to the Virgin Suicide, so it was pretty early in their music recording, when they're recording music. But what I remember is after I imported this into iTunes at the time, the band that they were named was French Air Band, which I'm sure is no longer the case. And so for a while, I thought they were called French Air Band, and it wasn't until later that I learned that they are Air.
Oh, now our audience doesn't know this, but you and I are members of an elite group of people who are no longer employed in that industry, and that is video rentals. We are former Blockbuster customer service representatives. Here we go.
That's true.
Still got my card. Still got my shirt. Woo! Back in the day, when you were working at Blockbuster, did you ever recommend Go to anyone?
I'm sure that I did. And I guess another point of interest that I have with this movie is it being directed by Doug Liman. That was before he moved into all of the action movies that he's, I think, more familiar for having directed now.
Yeah.
With
what did you think about the movie when you first saw it?
You know, I was trying to think of what my memory of the movie was and separate that from what I think it probably is now, which I think this movie has a reputation for being derivative of Pulp Fiction. And so I remember liking it for having that fractured storytelling style that I think was pretty popular at that time. And that's really the main thing that I can recall. That, and again, liking the music in it. I think the thing that I'm most curious about is if it holds up, or if it just falls into the category of being a Pulp Fiction ripoff, I guess. I'm optimistic that it does hold up, but I don't know what I'm basing that on. It might just be a lot of nostalgia, I guess, that's left over in my head.
Yeah. Well, all right. It's time to begin and watch Go again. We'll catch you after the credits roll. Yeah. Go! See it again, see it again. Cinema, see it again. See it again. Cinema. See it again. See it again. Cinema. See it again. See it again. Cinema. See it again. See it again. And then talk about it. And we're back. So, what did you think of it, seeing it all these years later? Go.
I was surprised at how much of it that I remember after it being as long as it has been. I must have watched this a lot. even lines of dialogue, I knew they were coming
Mhm.
before they were said. I would say that I think it holds up. I probably have a little bit more of a generous opinion carved out because I have kind of a soft spot for it.
So you feel like your appraisal of it is somewhat generous because of nostalgia?
I do. I think it's pretty derivative of Pulp Fiction. Seeing
Hmm.
it, I don't know. I think it's also kind of a time capsule of like '90s pop culture. In the both between the music and then Katie Holmes. I'm assuming Dawson's Creek was on at this time,
Yeah.
and Scott Wolf is coming from Party of Five. And
This is a funny thing. Like, I love movies. Obviously, this is see it again
mm,
cinema, but I did not watch popular television shows in high
mm,
school, largely because I just never could like organize my life around watching a show on a particular night. But I
mm,
liked movies because you had the movie, you could pop the tape in.
mm-hmm.
So like like when you talk about Party of Five, I'm like, I guess that's a show, but I've never seen an episode of that. I don't know if I've ever seen an episode of Dawson's Creek.
Yeah, I'm not
So,
sure I have either.
or like all these actors who are on television shows who then made their leap into movies and then became like, I know Jay Moore, I know Katie Holmes, like but I know them through their movies and celebrity culture, not from their television work. When it's been 20 years since a film has come out, and this movie's 24 years old, are there moments where you think if they made this today, they probably would omit this or do something somewhat differently?
I'm not sure rave culture exists in the way that it's portrayed in this movie. I don't know that that's necessarily ever existed, at least that I've
Yeah.
personally experienced. I don't know that that's as familiar.
I love going to the clubs, man. Getting the glow sticks. No.
Mm,
Um, what that's totally that's totally around. There raves are
mm.
happening in every city in America today in 2023.
Yeah, that could very well be true, I suppose.
Yeah,
Uh,
Merry Xmas. Yeah, anything else that you think that maybe they would change?
I don't know that it would necessarily change. Something that stood out to me. It was funny to see beepers being used right
Yeah,
before like smartphones were available. So that aged the movie in a way that I thought was kind of funny.
yeah,
Um,
having people being paged. What are some things that you see are like Tarantino-esque or derivative of Tarantino's contributions?
oh, well, I think you acknowledged the opening of the trunk scene. That seemed very reminiscent. But I feel like the whole that at the center of this, there's three storylines that are basically surrounding a drug deal. Story structure is the most obvious comparison in that it's not this linear storyline. It kind of
Hmm.
doubles back every so often, and you get to see um, from a different character's perspective interactions that took place earlier, and it adds
Hmm.
something to it that I think was in, inspired by Pulp Fiction, because I think otherwise this plot is one that didn't require being told this way.
Yeah,
But it
it benefits from it because as I was watching, I think one of the strengths of this film is I had no idea how it was actually going to end. There were so many moments where, because they have so many moving pieces, there are things like, oh yeah, I forgot about when Katie Holmes and Timothy Oliphant are making out on the stairs. I was like, oh yeah, there's the guy who sewed up the bullet wound.
mm,
And then you find out that that's that guy's dad, The Wire,
oh yeah,
on
the recording device on there.
yeah. I think that that's part of the energy of maybe the 90s is this idea of like what comes next. We feel like a lot of stories have already been told in
Mm,
so many formulaic ways. There was something about breaking open the continuity and having all these mini plots of different characters and their alternate perspectives rather than there being one protagonist.
hmm
That probably felt very liberating because you could make it about the energy and the unpredictability, yet still the idea is they all connect in ways that they don't expect. And I was in high school in the 90s, and that's
Huh.
what movies that generally did that usually did, like kind of tickle my brain in some ways.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think there were other storylines that benefited from uh, things that were given away later on. Most notably, I think the relationship between Scott Wolf and Jay Moore early in the movie. You're not really sure what their agenda is exactly, and it isn't until later that that's elaborated on and kind of gives them more depth. You understand that because they are recognizable people. There's obviously more to their story, but I think it adds something to it when it's given away later on. All of the details surrounding their situation.
Before we had watched the film, you had mentioned that there was a same-sex couple, and you were curious about how aspects of that relationship would appear today. And so I was paying attention to that with Zach and Adam. But as the episode went on, and once they got to William Fichtner's house, I realized they are really playing up, like, it seems that they're trying to set up some kind of like foursome or some kind of swinger kind of thing, but really the reveal is they're trying to get them into a pyramid scheme. I thought was a real big surprise, but I also wondered if it was maybe a cover, because once they realized that they weren't able to go through with it. It's a very weird scene.
Yeah, it was. What you're describing is I was unsure of how the attitude towards a same-sex couple might have been treated in a comedy in the 90s compared to what, if there were jokes that may not, jokes that we wouldn't, want to see today. And I don't think that their relationship was played as itself as a punchline, which I wasn't my memory of it, but I was also relieved that wasn't the case. Though William Fichtner's interests are definitely played up as creepy and weird. Yeah, and the same is true for his wife, Jane Krakowski.
I love how she plays a vivacious, attractive person, but she is a vivacious, attractive person, but she's able to somehow play in that small part someone that is attractive, but you're not drawn to them. Like, sure. That's a weird liminal state, but
the funny premise that you're walking into is there's this housewife that's not getting any attention from her husband, who seemingly hasn't been honest about his sexuality, and she is lonely or whatever the case may be. And so at this dinner table in the scene, where it finally becomes clear that they're trying to sell them on their pyramid scheme, their multi-level marketing program. They suddenly became really good teammates. I don't know. They really came through and were all in on this.
Maybe it's trying to say that there's a certain vapidity about that kind of law enforcement mindset that they're not going to break the law or the rules of the PD by trying to market to their coworkers because they're prohibited from that. The idea of them moving up in the ranks. It dovetails really well with him wanting to bust the drug dealers. Like, you bust this person.
That's true.
And then you move up and then bust the next person, go up and up and up. Mm-hmm. That mindset, like the logic of how they're saying it. And then when you think about the Las Vegas dad sewing up his bouncer, talking about incompetence, and you cause them to fall on their ass, so then you get to move up.
And all of those are pretty hollow rises to influence or power, or whatever
And I always pay attention to the first exchange or lines or words in a story. And so that scene with the really snooty mother who's worried about the double coupons, and she's like, don't think that you're someone you're not. I used to have your job. And she's like, well, look where it got you. it sets this really cynical tone about just how far can you go in America with the way the system is, to where she's about to be evicted, so she's gonna somehow try to sell drugs. Rana's character is interesting
Yeah.
in that way.
I will mention this movie is the reason I know who Sarah Polley is, and so as of today, she's better known as a director, clearly. But it's funny to think that my interest in watching women talking last year was in part an extension of enjoying Go. However many years ago, there's not much connection between those movies.
These two stories seem so worlds apart. She's come a long way. I think that there are some weird casting choices, like they maybe were trying to play her up as like, hey, she's like Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction. I mean, or I don't know the name of the character, but man, he seemed like he was doing a bad Michael Rappaport impression.
I think that's Breckenmeyer.
Yeah, Breckenmeyer. Man, I definitely think the discussion of race and how the N-word was dropped in that Las Vegas road trip scene, I'd be really interested in like what Taye Diggs thought of the script. Because I kept wondering, like, why is this guy with
these losers?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense. Why they were part of his entourage. It's funny. The Vegas sequence is probably, I think, the weakest sequence in the film.
I agree,
but it's probably the sequence that a lot of the footage in the trailer was used to sell the movie, and I bet there are some people who that's their favorite part, with the car chases, the
nudity,
the fire, the chase, I thought that Timothy Olyphant's character was really interesting because he had this kind of like calm but menacing Bill Hader type quality. I mean, he's topless, he's wearing a Santa hat, he's got his one nail painted, he's
got dice tattooed on his neck.
Yeah. As the story went on and I saw him like trying to appeal for calm, he reminded me of Lance from Pulp Fiction, the cereal eating guy that sells. I felt like his character was in some ways a nod back to Lance, of like an approachable drug dealer guy, but who was also like didn't want any drama in his life.
I think that's another reminiscent feeling of Pulp Fiction. Also these criminals who are willing to be violent, and their conversation is about the family circus, or it's making reference to Breakfast Club, or these like kind of pulp culture that seems very Tarantino-esque.
I think what we can take away from this is, even all these years later, it's really easy to look at a film after 1994 and see just how much of a ripple effect Tarantino had on screenwriters and directors who were chasing after a certain kind of coolness and fun. I don't know what kind of future that trio will have as the new millennium, is imminent. But
yeah, I feel like so there's a point in the movie where she says that she's 17, which strains believability.
Yeah,
obviously. But I don't know if that was how old they're supposed to, I don't think that's how old they're supposed to be, even as their characters, just because
they seem older.
Yeah, or at least their lifestyle suggests they aren't high school age. What I will say is, as far as, questioning where their future goes from there, I can, speak for myself in the way that I certainly had friends, didn't do anything like was portrayed in this movie, but considered them pretty close friends, and that was just a flash in the pan sort of experience that happened one summer or something like that. And I feel like that's sort of what this was an example of for these characters. They just happened to work with each other, maybe.
Yeah. I think that maybe there's a better title for this movie than Go.
I was wondering that watching it, because there's a lot of emphasis on the word go and all of its various ways that it's used throughout the movie. I can't think of a better title myself. I don't know that the thread that was drawn throughout the movie necessarily made it seem wildly clever or anything along those lines. I guess something curious about this is that it being a Doug Liman movie, I think this is, it's the last movie he did before The Bourne Identity, and then Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Jumper and Edge of Tomorrow and all these other much larger movies.
He did Edge of Tomorrow? Oh, dude, that movie is so good.
I noticed he did the cinematography, or Doug Liman did the cinematography for this movie himself. And after seeing that, I was paying attention to it, and I was less impressed, I guess. When I was paying closer attention to it, it seemed to have a lot of like skewed angles. I think that were very reminiscent of like music videos of the time.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's not a compliment to the movie.
It was an entertaining film. I'm glad you picked it and shared it with me, because I don't know if I ever would have gotten around to seeing this movie if you had chosen it for this episode. So what about you? Did you like the movie Go? Have you seen it before? If so, please write in the comments below what you think about Go. Well, all right. That'll do it for this episode of See It Again Cinema, where old movies make magical new memories. Thanks for rewatching, and Mark, thanks for watching with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
See it again, see it again. Cinema, see it again, see it again. Cinema.